I love this movie. Hello, everybody. I am the Spirit Man, the embracer of human good and analyst of fiction. And Merry Christmas Eve, everybody. I thought the perfect movie to talk about for what I remembered skit videos would be none other than the 1951 very underrated classic of A Christmas Carol, starring Alistair Sim as Ebenezer Scrooge himself. You know, we've watched this, my folks and I have watched this movie every Christmas Eve for a long, long time, for as long as I can remember. It truly is practically a perfect, concise retelling of the famous Charles Dickens novella from the early 19th century, from many decades ago at this point, and still holds up well after so many decades later. There's not much else to say. I mean, we all pretty much know the story, and if there are anybody who is in their 20s or so who is not familiar with the story, I think it's high time we let them in on what it's all about. And this would be the perfect version of A Christmas Carol to get into, if you know what I mean. So, let's not waste any more time and start reenacting what I loosely remember of the 1951 Christmas Carol classic with Alistair Sim. Yep, Sim. My bad, it's Sim, not Slim, it's Sim. Okay, let's not waste any more time and get started with this What I Remembered skit thing for A Christmas Carol. And start. Okay, so we have some really grimmish, cool opening credits with book pages, I think, and we have a sort of close-up of the very first page of the novella, the classic novella from way back when, as the narrator first speaks the first lines, which are more or less true to the original book, saying, "Old Marley was dead, to begin with, as dead as a doornail, and Scrooge was so on and so forth." And the first thing we see is Ebenezer Scrooge walking up to a couple of businessmen who are discussing about Christmas and so forth. And I think that's when, in this movie, Scrooge says humbug for the first time, saying, "Christmas is a humbug, and good day, gentlemen." And he goes to work where he does his business of, honestly, after all these years, I never really kept track of exactly what business he does, especially one where he only needs one assistant to help him during all hours of every workday he does. But it's a business thing where he collects people's money and he keeps people's money safe while also keeping a lot of money for himself because he's really, really greedy and all. And he constantly verbally abuses his assistant Bob Cratchit at their private office, which I think still has the sign Scrooge and Marley, which refers to his past business partner Jacob Marley, who passed away 7 years ago. In fact, I think they mentioned that in the very first scene of this movie, where Mr. Marley has been dead for 7 years. In fact, he died 7 years ago on this very night. And so on and so forth. And while working at the office, a couple of charity folks come up to Scrooge and ask for a generous donation to children's charity. And Scrooge just harshly asks, "Are the prisons? Have any prisons been destroyed? No. Have the factories been destroyed? No. Then that's where you should be sending the children." And so on. You know, the famous, "Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?" Now, I won't waste any more time talking about donating large sums of money to you gentlemen. Good day. And after that, I think, is when Scrooge's nephew comes in happily, merrily chanting, "Merry Christmas, Mr. Cratchit. Merry Christmas, Uncle." Bah! Humbug. Christmas a humbug? You can't honestly mean that. And, you know, Scrooge calls him out, yelling, that Christmas is stupid and whatnot, and the nephew just keeps objecting him, walking out as happily as ever, saying, "A Merry Christmas Eve and a Merry Christmas to you, Uncle." And Scrooge just yells at him, "Humbug!" And then I think Bob Cratchit requests to have Christmas off because it's Christmas and all, and everybody should have Christmas off for work, pretty much, right? And Scrooge reluctantly agrees and goes to have dinner by himself at a restaurant where he wants to ask for more bread, but the waiter reminds him that will cost £5 more, £10 more. And Scrooge just looks at him sternly and then it immediately regresses, saying, "No more bread." And then the scene cuts to him returning home, where you see Jacob Marley's ghost for the first time on the doorknob, saying silently, "Scrooge." And Scrooge is all creeped out, saying, "Jacob Marley? Scrooge." Scrooge feverishly enters the house and still hears Marley's voice throughout the house saying, "Scrooge." But I think Scrooge literally yells "humbug" again and again, moving through the house as he's getting himself settled, yelling, "Humbug, humbug, 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 humbug." He eventually is settled down in his night robe and pajamas and so forth. I think drinking some coffee or something, drinking some tea. And as the scene drags on, you feel like something's not right or something is coming. And eventually you do hear this, you hear this very loud rattling racket going up the stairs towards Scrooge's bedroom, until eventually you see Jacob Marley's ghost standing there in the doorway. And this is the first time that Scrooge has seen Marley in 7 years, in exactly 7 years. And, what they do here, the way they edit this together to make it look like you're really seeing a ghost there is just really, really impressive, especially for the time. Because obviously they had to use layers of film, layers of film negatives, I guess is the proper term, to make it look like the actor was there, but not really. Because, this was decades before green screens were invented and so forth. And then Scrooge, just like scared to death, asks, "Who are you?" "No, ask me who I was." "Fine, who were you?" "In life, I was your business partner, Jacob Marley. And I wear the chain I made in life. I wear the chain I made in life of all the people I made suffer," and so forth. And Scrooge tries to test if this is really a ghost, if he hasn't lost his sanity, holding like a toothpick and saying, "Do you see this toothpick?" "I do," after Marley sits down. And then eventually Marley just screams at the top of his lungs, saying, "Do you believe in me or not?" Yes, I do. And Marley continues whining, complaining about how things were so awful back then. And Scrooge says, "But you were a man of business, Jacob." "Business? Mankind was my business. Oh! And I've come to warn you, you will suffer the same fate as I will if you do not begin repenting tonight." "Oh, yes, please, Jacob, please. I will do anything. Tonight, you will be visited by 3 spirits. You will be haunted by 3 spirits. No, actually, I don't want that, Jacob. Please, no. Without these visits, you cannot hope to save yourself from the fate I now live. I am now doomed to." And then like I think it was he also says that at the beginning at the strike of 1 in the morning, a spirit was going to visit him at every hour from like 1, 2, 3, literally in the morning. And then before he eventually leaves, Marley opens the window and points out, yelling, "Look! Look at all of this!" And he shows like literally dozens of ghosts who are around this homeless woman and child who cannot do anything to help them. And Scrooge says, "What is this? Who are they?" "The people who are trapped forever." And Marley just disappears, and then he joins the ghosts who are trapped. And Scrooge, absolutely terrified beyond compare, shuts the window and jumps in bed and cuddles and curdles, scared. But it's time for the deeds to be done. And just as Marley says, at 1 o'clock, when the bell strikes 1, Scrooge is visited by the ghost of Christmas past. And I think, if I recall correctly, the entire series of scenes with the ghost of Christmas past takes up literally half of the film. And we see how Scrooge was growing up. We see his old childhood home, and the ghost of Christmas past, who appears as an old man, which I always thought was pretty cool, even as a kid. An old man in a white spirit-like dress or robe or whatnot. He explains that these are the shadows of the past, Ebenezer. We cannot touch them; they cannot see us. Look at you as you were, Ebenezer. Where Scrooge sees like a young Ebenezer Scrooge, absolutely refusing to play with any other children or even barely to talk to any other children. He's just working every Christmas Eve, every Christmas Day, year after year after year after year after year, even until he's a young adult, like 18 or 20, 21. And he is eventually visited by his loving sister, Franny. And I remember the adult Scrooge sees her for the first time in so many years, and is so happy he tries to hug her, yet crying out, "Franny!" But of course, since these are shadows, she just goes right through him, and he watches as Franny tells young Scrooge, "We are here, Father and I are here to take you away, take you someplace better, where you'll never be lonely or sad again." And then they go off, and then we see these flashbacks where Scrooge works for a very kind business. What the hell was that about? There aren't supposed to be any jump cuts, but whatever. As I was saying, we see other flashbacks where we see Scrooge working for a very kind businessman. Can't remember the businessman's name at the moment, but he falls in love with a beautiful young lady named, what was her name? I think it was Annie or something. Can't quite remember. But he falls in love with her, and they grow up. But Scrooge gets more and more involved with business. He meets a much younger Jacob Marley, and he gets more involved with much rougher, more ruthless businessmen who I think they have a rivalry with the nice businessman, if I recall, and eventually kick him out or force him to retire or take advantage of his retirement or something like that. And Scrooge and Marley become more and more greedy and corrupt as they get older and older. And Scrooge ultimately loses the love of his life because of how much he's been consumed by greed. And Annie tells him, "A coin has replaced me in that part of your heart." And Scrooge very coldly abandons her, walks out, and Annie just softly cries out, "Goodbye," and then cries to herself, all alone. And then I think then we see a much older Scrooge and Marley who are closer to Alistair Sim and the Jacob Marley actor as they appear in the present day, where they're becoming the top businessmen of whatever branch of business they're doing. Can't remember. Never really took a foolhardy note as to exactly what kind of money business they're involved in, but it's greedy, it's powerful. That's all there is. That's all we really need to know. And I think Marley's the one who had this big business idea that would make everybody, all these businessmen, richer, but would ultimately have severe consequences on the less fortunate. And we see that Bob Cratchit comes into the picture, becomes Scrooge's assistant, Scrooge and Marley's assistant, if I recall. But then one of the very last flashbacks in the whole Ghost of Christmas Past montage of sequences, which every time it transitions to a new scene, there's this really cool effect where we see an hourglass. I think the hourglass is coming back or it's moving forward, and it's in like this little tunnel of snow and mist and stuff, if I recall correctly. And then when Marley is dying, he requests Scrooge to visit him, but Scrooge, who has become so selfish, so cold and greedy at this point that he doesn't care at all that his best friend is dying. I think he literally says, "People die. So do Mr. Marley. So does Mr. Marley. Why should I go?" But he insists. "He may die tonight," says his servant woman. Says his maid. So then she at her insistence, Scrooge comes to visit. He comes to Marley's deathbed, and he barely wakes up in time to talk to him. And Scrooge is like, "Oh, so you are awake? How's it going? You're dying. It sucks. Anything you want to say to me?" Scrooge, we were wrong. We were wrong. Oh, we're wrong? We're wrong about something? We're wrong about things all the time, right? Save yourself, Scrooge. And then he just dies. So it's implied that Marley realized way too late just what terrible things he and Scrooge had done. And then, Scrooge just coldly leaves his dead corpse behind, saying stuff like, "Well, that's that. Now time to get more money and more stuff." And then we see the real Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Past preparing for one more shadow. One more shadow. No, show me no more, because at this point, Scrooge is overwhelmed. For the first time in so many years, Scrooge is overwhelmed with guilt and sadness and all these other emotions that he kept blocked for so long. No more. I don't want to live anymore. But the ghost explains to him, as we see one last flashback of him signing, getting all of Marley's possessions. The ghost explains, "Jacob Marley was your best friend for many, many years. And how did you repay his kindness following his death? You took away his house, all of his items, all of his possessions. Look at your face, Scrooge. Look at the cold, wicked delight." And then we cut to Scrooge in bed, just softly moaning to himself, "No. But then the bell dings again, goes again, and it's 2:00 now, and it's time for the second ghost's visit. Scrooge tries to stay in bed, but the ghost calls out, come in, Ebenezer!" Oh. And Scrooge reluctantly goes to the next room over, and he sees the big, jolly Ghost of Christmas Present. I'm the Ghost of Christmas Present, and I love Christmas. I love all this good stuff. Did I tell you I was the Ghost of Christmas Present? And then we have this fun little montage of Scrooge seeing what Christmas is like around London, how it's all great and glorious, And we even see Scrooge's past love, Annie, helping out the homeless at a homeless shelter and so on. And then Scrooge sees Bob Cratchit's family and is very touched by the endurance of Bob Cratchit's family, including that of the famous Tiny Tim, who is crippled in one leg but still very bright and spirited and so forth. And Scrooge says, what a special, special boy. Tell me, Spirit, will Tiny Tim live? Well, if he's going to die, he better do it quickly and decrease the world's population. Scrooge feels incredibly guilty after the Ghost of Christmas Present reminds him of the wicked words he said just recently. I think it was right after this scene or another scene where the Ghost of Christmas Present leaves Scrooge behind saying, "My part is done here, Ebenezer. Now, you will be visited by the last spirit very soon. But before I go, I must show you these two children." "Who are they, Spirit? Are they yours?" "They belong to..." I forget what he says here. Beware both of them, but especially beware this boy, because they are both wicked, or they're both corrupt, or whatever." "Well, wasn't there any way to help them?" And then the ghost once again reminds him of his own words, or at least twisting his own words, crying out, "Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?" And Scrooge is overwhelmed with these words, with these thoughts. He tries to escape, but then we see the final spirit putting out his hand, and the final bell dings and dongs. And Scrooge is all overwhelmed and terrified yet again, going, "Ah! If I'm correct, you are the ghost of Christmas yet to come. Please show me what you need to, because I really would rather be in bed. I'd rather be in bed." And then we see the ghost of Christmas future, as I call him, slowly turn around and start walking towards the camera. And this time we see a very horrible future where everything is all dark and grimmish, and the worst out of the first things we see is the death of Tiny Tim, where the Cratchit family is suffering horribly because Tiny Tim has passed away. And it's not clear exactly how soon of Christmas future this is. It's probably not even a few years. It's probably not even a year. Like, all this horrible stuff is probably happening the very next Christmas. And after we see the heartbreaking aftermath of Tiny Tim's death, we start seeing these scenes of people collecting the former possessions of this passed away rich man, and including these businessmen from these common resident folk, including Scrooge's old maid, who used to be Marley's maid. And these businessmen talking about, "Oh yes, he passed away last night, and good riddance to him. He was a really old bugger. Who cared about him?" And Scrooge suddenly realizes, wait a minute, who are they talking about? What's this all about? Why am I seeing all this? Why am I seeing all this now? But he knows exactly who they're talking about. And the ghost takes him to the cemetery, and before he approaches the grave, the Scrooge checks back with him a couple times, saying, "Are these the things that will come or may come? Can this be changed?" And there he sees the grave, Ebenezer Scrooge. He realizes that he's going to die, and he's going to die a horrible, horrible way if he does not repent for everything. He begs and cries to the spirit, "Please, please, I will learn everything. I will embrace everything I have experienced. I will embrace the past, the present, and the future. Please, please, let this not be. Please, please." And he falls asleep one last time, and when he awakes, it's Christmas morning, and he realizes he hasn't missed any of Christmas, and he's all happy and alive, and he's all merry and such, and he frightens his maid. He acts all crazy. He even chases her out, yelling, "Wait, wait, wait. It's okay, it's okay. I'm not mad. I'm not insane." and he raises her salary and so forth, and gives her even more extra money, and he does all these great and wonderful things, sending a giant turkey to Tiny Tim and the Cratchit family, with the help of a little boy he sees passing by the house, saying, "Get me a turkey. Get me that turkey. You mean the turkey that's as big as me? Oh yes, bright, bright boy." And then he has that touching scene with Bob Cratchit in the office, because maybe, I can't remember if they agreed for Bob to like work less hours that day or whatnot. But yeah, and slowly, gradually, Scrooge reveals that he is not the same person he was. He's a very different man, saying, "Oh, Bob, I have not lost my senses. I have come to them." And he laughs and laughs and sends Bob off, and he briefly relents, Scrooge saying, "I don't deserve to be this happy, but I just can't help it." And then the film ends with a very touching scene of Scrooge walking around happily greeting everybody, and Tiny Tim coming around and crying out, "Uncle Scrooge, Uncle Scrooge!" And Scrooge holds up Tiny Tim, spinning him around, and they walk off as the narrator explains how great of a person Scrooge has become, how he's lived his final years as a very, very happy man. And Tiny Tim, who did not die, continued being gracious and merry. As Tiny Tim himself said, "God bless us, everyone." The famous line, which I forgot to mention earlier, but that's Christmas Carol for you. God bless us, everyone. So, that took a long time to explain, but did I remember that right? Is that how the 1951 Christmas Carol film went about? Well, let me know in the comments, or... Oh, whoa. Another jump cut. I think my fiend fellow friend is screwing things around again for my videos. Anyway, so, did I remember that right? Is that how it went? Probably, for the most part. I mean, this isn't even that long of a movie. It's not even an hour and a half, but I've gone on about it long enough. If you haven't seen this version of A Christmas Carol yet, please go and check it out. And let me know in the comments what you think of this and of my other videos. And yeah, this is just such a great film. It's just presented so greatly. The emotions, the special effects of the time, the cinematography, and all that good stuff. There's really not much more to say about it, except that this is pretty much the ideal Christmas Carol movie. Far better than that 2009 Walt Disney Christmas Carol stuff. God, that stuff was creepy. But anyway, go check it out if you haven't. I love this movie. In a way, I will always love this movie to death. Merry Christmas Eve, everybody, and see you tomorrow for the last of the Christmas 9 for Christmas Day itself. This is the Spirit Man, the embracer of human good and analyst of fiction. And thank you so, so much. And good night to all. Merry Christmas Eve. And be good for Santa, right? What the heck, I felt like saying that. Alright, happy December, and Merry Christmas Eve. Goodbye.